He hadn't eaten in 14 hours. But when he saw a starving teen by the roadside, this veteran trucker gave up his only meal to feed him. What he didn't know, someone was watching, and that one moment would change his entire life. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the flat horizon of Arizona's cracked highways, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Dust clung to the windshield of Jeffrey Blake's rig as he pulled into Maggie's Diner, a weather-worn building just off the interstate, its flickering sign buzzing faintly in the dry air. Jeffrey was a man of few needs and fewer words. In his early 60s, with silver hair hidden beneath a faded U.S. Army cap and a face marked by time and road dust, he looked like the kind of man who had seen enough and talked little about it. His denim shirt was sun-bleached, his boots scuffed, and his hands calloused from decades behind the wheel. He checked the crumpled bills in his wallet. Just over $7. Enough for coffee and a sandwich, maybe. Gas would have to wait until morning. Inside, the diner smelled of burnt bacon and stale coffee. The booths were half empty. The atmosphere was quiet. Jeffrey slid into a seat by the window, nodding politely to Rose, the waitress, as she handed him a menu she knew he wouldn't really read. "Evenin', Jeffrey," she said with a weary smile. "The usual?" "Yeah, just coffee and a grilled cheese, if that's all right." "You got it." She didn't ask questions. She knew better than to pry. But she always noticed things. As Rose disappeared into the kitchen, the door creaked open. A boy, barefoot, skinny, his clothes stiff with dust, stepped in. 17, maybe younger. Sunburnt face, hollow eyes. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Jeffrey watched him without staring. The boy stood uncertain at the threshold, like a stray animal not sure if it would be welcomed or chased away. Rose returned with Jeffrey's coffee and glanced toward the door. "Poor kid," she muttered. "Don't think he's got a dime." Jeffrey nodded slowly. He looked down at his sandwich, then back at the boy. Without a word, he stood, walked over, and gently tapped the boy's shoulder. "You hungry?" The boy hesitated, his pride and hunger fighting a silent war in his eyes. Jeffrey handed him the plate. "Go on. I already ate," he lied. The boy took it, nodding quickly, almost ashamed, and sat at a booth in the far corner. He devoured the sandwich in small, desperate bites, trying not to look like he was starving. Jeffrey returned to his booth with just his coffee. Rose noticed. "You sure, Jeffrey?" she asked softly. He sipped the cup. He needed it more. In the far corner, behind a newspaper, a sharply dressed man had been watching. Luther Russell, clean-shaven, salt and pepper hair, tailored navy suit, lowered his paper slightly, just enough to observe. He didn't smile, but his eyes lingered. Rose noticed his interest. "You from around here?" she asked, leaning on the counter as she refilled his mug. "No," Luther said, passing through. "What's his name?" "Him?" She nodded toward Jeffrey. "Jeffrey Blake. Been coming here 10, maybe 15 years. Drives freight for Swift Ride. Quiet guy. Solid. Real salt of the earth." Luther said nothing, just took a sip of his coffee, thoughtful. The boy finished eating and, without a word, stood up. He looked over at Jeffrey, who raised his cup in a silent toast. The boy nodded once, like a vow, and disappeared out the door. Jeffrey left a few coins on the table and stood, stretching his tired back. As he passed Rose, she pressed a hand to his arm. "You sure you're okay, Jeffrey?" "I'll be fine. Got coffee in my veins and a full tank of gratitude," he said with a soft chuckle. He pushed open the door, the bell chiming behind him, and stepped out into the growing dusk. His truck loomed ahead, dust-covered and faithful. He climbed in, started the engine, and pulled away slowly, the tires crunching gravel beneath them. Inside, Luther watched the red taillights disappear into the sunset. "He gave up his only meal," he said under his breath. Rose looked at him, curious. "What do you do, mister?" Luther glanced up, offering a rare smile. "I watch, and sometimes I act." He finished his coffee, left a $100 bill on the table, and walked out, leaving Rose puzzled and Jeffrey completely unaware that something had already begun to shift. A small gesture, witnessed by the right eyes, had just set a new story in motion. The wind had picked up outside Maggie's diner as twilight deepened into night. The last of the evening crowd trickled out, the sign buzzing faintly in the background like a tired heartbeat. Inside, the diner had settled into its familiar hush, just the soft clink of dishes, the occasional scrape of a chair, and the hum of old memories that lived in the walls. Luther Russell remained in his corner booth, unnoticed by most. To anyone glancing his way, he looked like a traveling businessman finishing a late dinner. But Rose, as always, saw more than most. She could tell there was something different about him, the quiet precision in his posture, the way he watched without reacting, like he was measuring every detail. She walked over to refill his cup. "Still warm?" she asked casually. Luther nodded politely. "Thank you." Rose leaned her elbow on the counter near his table, rubbing her tired neck. "You ever see someone just do something kind without expecting anything back? No show, no words, just real kindness." Luther looked up, his eyes curious. "I have. Tonight, in fact." She smiled softly. "Jeffrey Blake. Comes in here after long hauls. Doesn't say much. Been through more than most, I think. Vietnam vet. Lost his wife a while back. Doesn't talk about it. Man barely makes enough to keep the wheels turning. But he still gave that boy his only meal." Luther set his coffee down. "You know him well?" "Well enough. He doesn't ask for anything. Never late on his tab. Once helped patch up the kitchen door when it broke. Wouldn't take a dime for it. People like that, they go unseen." There was a flicker of frustration in Rose's voice now, something sharper beneath her usual calm. "I just don't get it. Why is it always the loud ones who get noticed? The talkers, the showboats, they climb up like it's nothing. But someone like Jeffrey," she shook her head, "he does everything right and somehow stays invisible." Luther didn't reply. He simply watched her, absorbing every word. Rose wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was venting, sincerely, the kind of honesty you only spill at the end of a long shift. And that made it stick. The name Jeffrey lingered in Luther's mind like a thread that needed pulling. He glanced casually toward the window where the truck still sat parked across the street. A modest rig, clean but aging. No vanity plates, no stickers, just the kind of vehicle owned by someone who didn't want attention. When Rose stepped away to tend to a table, Luther took out his phone. A quick search, just the name Jeffrey, and the company she had mentioned in passing, Swiftride Freight. A driver database popped up. Jeffrey Blake, long-haul veteran. No disciplinary actions. Dozens of commendations buried in quarterly reports. Luther's expression didn't change, but something had shifted internally. He closed his phone slowly, eyes still fixed on the rig outside. Rose, oblivious, wiped down the counter, humming to herself. When she glanced at the clock and saw it was almost midnight, she stepped into the kitchen, returning with a paper-wrapped plate. Outside, Jeffrey was climbing back into his rig, exhausted. His stomach grumbled, but he ignored it. The night air was cool, and the hum of his diesel engine comforted him like an old friend. He didn't hear Rose coming until she knocked on the side of his truck. He rolled down the window. "Everything all right?" She handed him the plate through the window. "Leftovers," she said quickly. "Kitchen would just toss it. Figured you could use a bite." Jeffrey looked at her, hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Rose. Don't mention it." Their eyes met for a brief moment, just long enough to say everything they didn't need to speak aloud. Then Rose walked back inside, arms folded against the breeze. From the shadows of the parking lot, Luther watched the entire exchange. Not just the actions, but the impact. Jeffrey's quiet decency had echoed through that diner. First to Eric, then to Rose, and now to him. Small ripples, each reaching further than the last. He pulled out his phone again and opened a secure channel. "Get me everything you can on Jeffrey Blake. Full employment file. I want warehouse logs, route history, peer reviews." Discreetly. "Understood," came the response. By the time he returned to his hotel suite in Phoenix, the report was waiting. Luther poured himself a drink, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the file. Jeffrey's record with SwiftRide was unremarkable on the surface. Punctual, efficient, reliable. Company man. No promotions, no complaints. But then came a line that caught his eye. March 2022. Prevented a warehouse fire during a routine drop-off. Identified a faulty fuse box and used the truck's extinguisher. Declined recognition. Logged incident as minor maintenance alert. Luther leaned back, his mind spinning. This man had not only gone unnoticed, he had gone unseen, even by the very company he served loyally. A ghost among the gears of a machine that had stopped caring about people like him. Luther closed the file and stared out the hotel window. Somewhere down that endless stretch of blacktop, Jeffrey Blake was hauling freight, eating cold leftovers, unaware that he had just become the center of something much bigger. Luther Russell felt something stir in his chest, something dangerously close to conviction. He made a silent decision. This wasn't going to be a write-off. The morning sun painted the highway in long golden streaks as Luther Russell stepped out of a rented sedan and surveyed the nondescript building in front of him. SwiftRide Freight's regional office didn't look like much. Faded siding, a cracked sign barely hanging on, and a parking lot riddled with potholes. To the untrained eye, it was just another failing outpost in a crumbling logistics network. But to Luther, it had become the epicenter of something he couldn't ignore. Dressed down in jeans, a flannel shirt, and aviator sunglasses, he didn't look like a billionaire. That was the point. Inside, the air smelled of diesel oil. A few worn desks lined the front office, behind which sat a receptionist who barely looked up as Luther walked in. "I'm here for a meeting," he said calmly, using a pseudonym his assistant had arranged. She waved him through without checking his ID. In the break room, Luther struck up conversations, nothing formal, nothing recorded. He spoke with dispatchers, mechanics, even the janitor. He listened, and what he heard confirmed everything. "We're down to 3 working rigs in this district. The rest? Held together with duct tape and luck," muttered a mechanic with grease-stained hands and tired eyes. "Used to be proud to work here," said a dispatcher named Caleb. "Now, I don't even tell people where I work." But in the midst of the frustration, one name kept surfacing. Jeffrey? That man's a saint. Came in on his day off once to help train a rookie who was too nervous to drive alone. He fixed my tail light once with a coat hanger and a beer tab. Didn't even tell the boss. Luther nodded quietly, committing every word to memory. These weren't empty compliments. They were testimonies. The kind of stories that didn't appear on spreadsheets or boardroom slides. Later that afternoon, he met Emma, his assistant, his expression unreadable. "Put the green light on the plan," he said simply. She tilted her head. "Even if nobody knows it's you? Especially if nobody knows." Over the next few weeks, things began to shift, subtly, quietly. New tires showed up in the maintenance bay. GPS units were replaced. A couple of the older trucks were mysteriously swapped for newer models. Drivers started receiving small bonuses, fuel incentives, food stipends. Health coverage was expanded without warning. No memos, no press releases, just change. Jeffrey noticed first when his rig's old, static-ridden radio was replaced with a modern unit. He thought it was a mistake. Then came the new tires, followed by the smoother routes. One morning, he opened his paycheck and blinked twice. It was nearly double what he expected. He stared at the numbers like they might vanish if he blinked too fast. At the diner, Rose had her own mystery. She'd been scrubbing the counter when her manager handed her an envelope. Inside was a typed note. "For your daughter. You're not alone." Tucked with the note was a check, enough to cover the last 3 months of overdue bills. She stood frozen for a long minute, her hands trembling. Then she rushed into the kitchen, overcome with emotion. Whoever had done this knew her story and cared. Outside the diner, Jeffrey pulled into his usual spot, unaware that someone was watching from a parked sedan across the street. Luther sat behind the wheel, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold without stepping in. He didn't need thanks. He just wanted to see the ripples forming. That evening, Jeffrey sat in his cab, tuning the new radio as a light breeze stirred the desert air. He was still trying to make sense of everything, too proud to ask questions, too humble to assume it was meant for him. He almost didn't notice the figure approaching until the footsteps stopped right at his truck door. "Hey, mister." Jeffrey looked out the window and froze. It was him, the barefoot boy from the diner. But now he wore clean clothes, his hair trimmed, a name tag pinned to his button-up shirt. It read, Eric. Jeffrey opened the door. "You all right?" Eric smiled, nervously at first. "Yeah, better than I've been in a long time. I got a job. Part-time. Rose helped me. Said you were the one who gave me a reason not to quit." Jeffrey frowned, surprised. "I just gave you a sandwich." Eric shook his head. "No, you gave me dignity. You saw me when no one else did." Jeffrey didn't know what to say. He stared at the young man, a lump forming in his throat. All he could manage was a quiet, "I'm glad you're doing better." Eric nodded, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a keychain, handmade, crafted from old wire and leather. "I made this at the shelter. I've been waiting to give it to you." Jeffrey took it gently, his fingers brushing the boy's hand. "Thank you," he said softly. As Eric walked away, Jeffrey remained seated on the truck step, staring down at the gift in his hand. A simple object. But in it, he saw something much larger. Proof that the smallest kindnesses never disappear. They echo. Across the street, Luther watched it all unfold with a quiet smile. No headlines, no credit. Just a man, a boy, and the ripple of a single generous act. And it wasn't over yet. The announcement came quietly. A formal dinner at the regional SwiftRide hub, open to all drivers and support staff. The company cited it as a celebration of recent investments, improved performance, and a symbolic new chapter. Most employees didn't question it too deeply. After all, bonuses had appeared, trucks had been upgraded, and something in the air just felt different. People were hopeful, if a little confused. Jeffrey Blake received his invitation like everyone else, neatly folded in his company mailbox. No fanfare, no name singled out. Just a card with gold lettering and a request to dress appropriately and be on time. He thought about skipping it. Fancy gatherings weren't his thing. But Rose, ever insistent, gave him a sharp look over the diner counter. "You're going," she said, "even if I have to find you a clean shirt myself." That evening, the company hall was brighter than anyone remembered it. Clean tablecloths, a modest stage, string lights overhead. The kind of effort you'd expect from a company that wanted to prove it cared. Drivers showed up in button-downs and jeans, some even in suits. They joked nervously, wondering what was behind all this. Everyone had noticed the improvements, new radios, better rest stops, tech support that actually called back. But the why remained a mystery. Dinner was served. Chatter filled the room. Near the center sat Jeffrey, at a table with Rose and a few other longtime employees. Across from him was Eric, clean-shaven, tucked-in shirt, still a bit awkward in his skin, but proud. He was helping out part-time with SwiftRide's community outreach now, and he'd become a kind of unofficial face of their Second Chance program. Midway through the meal, a company rep stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. The room fell into a polite silence. "We've been through some rough miles," the speaker said, "but something changed recently. Investors saw what this company's really made of. Not numbers, not machines, but people. Drivers who don't cut corners. Staff who care about one another. People whose character convinced others to believe in us again." There was no mention of Jeffrey. No spotlight. Just a toast to the entire room. It landed well. The crowd clapped briefly, then returned to their conversations. Most were just happy to be recognized at all. Back at the table, Jeffrey pushed his food around his plate. He appreciated the gesture, even if he didn't fully understand it. That's when a man in a tailored navy suit approached their table and sat down across from him. "Mind if I join you?" Rose blinked in surprise. Eric looked like he'd seen a ghost. Jeffrey raised an eyebrow. "You're that guy from the diner." "Luther Russell," the man said, offering a nod. "Investor in SwiftRide. I've been watching quietly." Jeffrey didn't respond immediately. Luther continued, voice low, conversational. I saw what you did for that kid. He nodded toward Eric. Didn't think much of it at first. But then I kept watching. Your record. Your attitude. How people talk about you. And when I sat down with Eric, heard the whole story, how Rose helped too. Something clicked. He reached into his jacket and placed a simple key fob on the table. You've got a new rig waiting for you outside. Fully paid. It's yours. Jeffrey stared at the key for a moment, then looked up. Didn't do it to be seen. Luther smiled, not smugly but with a kind of satisfaction. That's exactly why it mattered. Eric leaned forward, quietly. I was sleeping under an overpass before you gave me that sandwich, Jeffrey. No shoes, no plan. Figured nobody would notice if I disappeared. But you did. And that, it pulled me out of something dark. The table fell into a moment of thoughtful quiet. No applause, no grand music. Just a quiet, honest exchange between people who didn't need to raise their voices to be heard. A few other guests nearby had overheard bits of the conversation. Someone snapped a photo, Jeffrey, Rose, Eric, and Luther in frame. No one was posing. It wasn't staged. But within the hour, the image was circulating online, along with a brief caption. One driver's quiet act led to a company's transformation. By morning, SwiftRide's social channels were flooded with shares and comments. Drivers from other companies took notice. Clients praised the company's values. Recruiters fielded new applications. The brand had become more than logistics, it had become human. Rose, after years of juggling shifts and hiding the strain of her daughter's health struggles, finally felt a bit of space to breathe. With the anonymous donation she'd received weeks earlier, now clearly linked to Luther, her daughter had started treatment. Rose had also been offered a new position at SwiftRide's operations center, coordinating driver support. It meant more stability, fewer overnight shifts, and a sense that her efforts hadn't gone unseen. As for Eric, he stayed on at the diner for a while longer, but his afternoons were now spent mentoring young people in town who were dealing with tough circumstances. His story, once hidden under grime and silence, had become a quiet symbol of resilience. The kid who had once been overlooked was now helping others find their footing. Jeffrey left the event quietly, new keys in hand, walking into the night beside Rose. He wasn't rich and he didn't want to be famous. But he wasn't invisible anymore. And for a man like Jeffrey, that was more than enough. This story reminds us that true kindness often goes unseen, but never unnoticed. What would you have done in Jeffrey's place? Let us know in the comments. If this story made you feel something, give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey, where ordinary people do extraordinary things. See you in the next video.